Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuary's channel. Tonight we slip into a warm, river-breathed world where mud brick walls hold the day's heat long after sunset, and where the sky looks so huge it feels like it is leaning down to listen. You're standing near a canal in southern Mesopotamia, and the air tastes faintly of silt and barley. Somewhere, a reed flute is doing its best, which is adorable because it sounds like a goose trying to remember a lullaby. You probably won't survive this. Not in the dramatic sword and sandals way, but in the quieter way where you realize your modern brain cannot stop asking, wait, who's in charge of the universe again? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments, because I love imagining this story drifting into bedrooms across different clocks. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a city-state that believes the world runs because the gods run it, and the gods run it because the city keeps them fed, dressed, honored, and emotionally reassured. That last part is not even a joke. The gods are powerful. Yes, but they are also picky. And the city is like a well-managed household where everyone has chores and everyone knows which cupboard holds the good cups for guests. If you want to understand why Marduk replaces older gods later on, you start here on a roof at dusk with the smell of baking bread and the sound of water moving through carefully cut channels. You climb a stairway that is not a stairway in the modern, hazard-inspected sense. It is more like stacked determination. The bricks are sun-dried and slightly uneven, and your sandals scuff up dust that feels as soft as flour. From the top, you can see rooftops like a patchwork of sleeping animals. Low houses press against each other for shade, and the canal catches the last light like a strip of bronze. Beyond the walls, fields stretch out in flat patience. Everything in this landscape is earned. Rain is unreliable, so life is negotiated with water, and water is negotiated with canals. And canals are negotiated with people who would absolutely rather be doing anything else. And that, right there, is your first mainstream historical fact. These city-states depend on irrigation systems, and those systems require coordinated labor and administration. You cannot keep a canal clean by vibes alone. Someone has to organize work crews, assign days, measure plots, and settle disputes when one farmer swears his neighbor stole water in the night. So the temple, the palace, and the scribal offices become the spine of the city. The gods are not floating abstractions. They are embedded in infrastructure. You look toward the main temple complex, which rises above the houses like a patient mountain made of bricks. A temple is not just a place to pray. It is an economic hub, a storage facility, a workplace, and a stage set for cosmic legitimacy. Grain goes in, rations come out, textiles are produced, and scribes count everything with a seriousness that would make an accountant weep with joy. The deity is considered the owner of land, the recipient of offerings, the ultimate landlord. The priests are the property managers, if that sounds unromantic. Welcome to how religion and administration cuddle up under the same blanket in ancient Mesopotamia. Now you pause, because the roof under your feet is warm, and the evening breeze feels like someone turning down the volume on the day. You can hear the city settle. Children call to each other. A donkey complains about its job, and somewhere a potter is still working because deadlines do not respect sunsets. You notice that people do not talk about faith the way you do. They talk about duty, order, reciprocity. The gods give fertility and protection. The city gives offerings and attention. Everyone is, in theory, satisfied. In this older world, The pantheon is not a fixed poster on a wall. It is more like a seating chart at a wedding. Who sits closest to the head table matters. Who gets honored first matters. Who is allowed to speak in rituals matters. And the seating chart can change when the family politics change. The older gods are not automatically erased when new ones rise. Often, they get nudged to a different seat, given a new title, or politely told to supervise something quieter, like the proper behavior of reeds or the emotional stability of distant mountains. You laugh softly, because even the divine can be reassigned. But right now, you are in the era before Marduk becomes the big name. You are in a patchwork of city-states, each with its own patron deity. The people in one city say their god is the most important. Because of course they do. It is their city, their canals, their temple, their taxes, their cosmic customer service line. If you go one city over, those people will tell you their god is the most important. And they will say it with the same calm confidence you hear in modern sports fans who swear their team has tradition. The universe, apparently, loves local pride. You lean on a parapet and let your eyes follow the canal. The water is dark now, reflecting a few early stars. And here comes the first gentle joke of the night. You realize the stars are like ancient verification badges, twinkling as if to say, yes, the sky is official. Down below, a procession moves along a street. Not a dramatic one, more like a purposeful shuffle. A few attendants carry baskets, and a priest in a clean garment walks with the careful posture of someone who knows everyone is watching. This is routine. The gods are served daily, like a king who never leaves his palace. Food is placed before the divine statue. Incense is burned. Hymns are spoken. The deity eats the essence, and the physical food is later redistributed or used by temple staff. In this way, the gods are fed and the people are fed. And the city keeps its own system humming, and you start to feel it. A god's power is not only in thunder or prophecy. It is also in the number of hands that work his fields, the number of scribes who write his name, the number of festivals that keep him in everyone's mouth. Prestige is built the same way buildings are built here, brick by brick, carried by someone with aching shoulders. This is where the calm explanation begins. People imagine religious change as a sudden flip, like a new app update that forces itself onto your phone overnight. But in a city-state, it is more like gradual renovation. You do not tear down the temple that stores your grain because you have a new theological opinion. You cannot. Your stomach will file a complaint. So shifts in divine hierarchy tend to mirror shifts in the city's real hierarchy. When a city rises in influence, its god rises with it. When a city falls, its god may keep dignity, but loses the best seat. Historians still argue whether these changes are driven more by political conquest, economic networks, or genuine devotional trends. Some emphasize top-down royal propaganda, with kings promoting a deity to unify people under a single cosmic banner. Others point to the slow, bottom-up reality of festivals, marriages, and trade, where gods travel with people and gradually become familiar. And some scholars insist it is both at once, because human life is rarely tidy enough to fit inside one explanation. You nod, because even in the ancient world, causation is a messy stew. Delicious, yes, but messy. You turn your head toward the temple again, and you think about how a statue can be a political fact. The divine image in the inner sanctuary is not treated as art. It is treated as presence. To capture a city's god in war is not just theft. It is cosmic humiliation. It is like stealing someone's Wi-Fi router and declaring their whole neighborhood spiritually offline. when later empires move gods around. It is a way of rearranging the spiritual map to match the political map. For now, though, your city is quiet. The old gods are stable in their roles. The major deities have long histories, deep cults, and rituals that feel timeless. The people tell stories about them the way you might talk about the weather, with respect, familiarity, and occasional irritation. You can almost hear someone mutter, "If the storm god would stop being moody, my roof would really appreciate it." That is joke number 2, and it is also kind of true. You walk along the roofline, stepping carefully. You pass drying reeds, pots, and bundles of wool. A woman below shakes out a blanket, and dust floats in the lamplight like tiny ghosts of the day. You realize something that matters for later. In a city-state, religion is not a separate compartment. It is the framework. Law, economy, agriculture, and legitimacy are all braided together. A god's replacement is rarely just an idea. It is an administrative shift, a ceremonial shift, a narrative shift, and a shift in who gets to say what in the public square. And then you hear, from somewhere deeper in the city, the low pulse of a drum. Not urgent, just steady. It reminds you of a heartbeat. The temple is keeping time. The city is keeping time. The gods are keeping time. You imagine the pantheon like a council of powerful personalities who can be negotiated with, ranked, and occasionally flattered into cooperation. If you want a deity to rise, you do not only write new myths, you build new rituals, you sponsor festivals. You convince people that this god has always mattered, and you do it so smoothly that it feels like remembering. Not changing. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit, because the courtyards are never short on whispers. You hear an older scribe tell a trainee that the gods' names are not just names. They are forces that can be mishandled. He says some names should not be spoken casually at night because it attracts attention, like shouting into a dark alley. Is that official doctrine? Not exactly. But it is the kind of belief that thrives when literacy is rare and writing feels like magic. In some circles, the act of inscribing a divine name on clay is treated as a kind of binding or anchoring, as if the sign itself has weight in the unseen world. You smile, because even now, people treat certain words like they can change the air. You slow your breathing and let the scene soften. The canal glints under starlight. The rooftops are cooling. The city is settling into sleep. And you are holding the first important thread before Marduk replaces anyone. The old gods are not simply old. They are embedded. They are institutionally supported. They are part of the city's daily schedule, like sunrise, ration distribution, and the inevitable argument over whose turn it is to clear silt from the canal. Joke number 3 is you imagining an ancient complaint tablet. Dear deity, my neighbor is stealing water again. Please smite him politely. You can almost see the priest stamping it, received. You keep walking, and you feel the weight of continuity. The pantheon feels stable because the city needs it to feel stable. Change, when it comes, will have to arrive wearing familiar clothes. It will have to sound like tradition even if it is innovation. It will have to be calm enough that people can keep baking bread and counting grain while the cosmos quietly rearranges its seating chart. You stay on that warm roof a little longer, watching the last orange leak out of the sky like someone slowly turning off a lamp. The city below you does not go silent so much as it changes texture. Day noises fade. Night noises sharpen. You hear water again. Louder now that conversations have thinned out. You also hear the kind of administrative calm that never sleeps. A distant call, a footstep, a door latch. The temple complex still glows with torchlight, and you realize something mildly terrifying in a very boring way. The gods are not just believed in, they are accounted for. You climb down and drift toward the temple district. Because if you want the calm city-state explanation for why a god like Marduk can rise and replace older gods, you have to see how divinity is stapled to the daily economy. You pass a courtyard where someone is washing a clay bowl. It is not a religious moment. It is a practical moment. And yet, in this world, practicality is half the religion. You are living inside a system where keeping order is sacred, where the line between worship and work is so thin you could slice it with a reed. At the outer edge of the temple complex, you see storerooms, workshops, and little clusters of people moving like they have routes memorized. A pair of men carry sacks of grain. A woman measures out something in a small cup and pours it into a jar with the concentration of a scientist. Except her lab is a courtyard and her notes are in her head. A scribe sits with his stylus, and you can almost feel his posture screaming. Do not bump me. I'm holding the universe together with numbers. This is your mainstream historical fact for this section. Temples in ancient Mesopotamian city-states function as major economic institutions, managing land, labor, and storage. With scribes recording rations and transactions on clay tablets, you can tell it is true just by the vibe. You do not build this much infrastructure around something that is purely symbolic. The temple is the city's warehouse, payroll office, and moral authority all at once. If you are looking for the engine that drives religious ranking, you are staring at it in the form of barley. You step closer and hear a scribe reciting a list, not dramatically, just steadily, like a human metronome, names, amounts, dates. You realize that in a city-state, the gods have portfolios the way modern bureaucracies do. One deity is tied to the city's kingship, another to justice, another to storm and fertility, another to scribal wisdom. Each god's temple staff, lands, and offerings reflect that portfolio. So when a god rises later, it is not only because poets write a cooler myth. It is because the god acquires more portfolio, more jurisdiction, more receipts, and you, modern you, cannot help thinking, this is divine paperwork. It is cosmic administration. Which leads to the first light joke of this section. You imagine the gods holding a meeting where someone says, "We'll circle back on the flood issue next quarter." And everyone nods like that is normal. It is absurd. It is also strangely close to how these systems feel on the ground. The world is managed. The gods are managers. The priests are managers of managers. The scribes are the ones who actually know what is going on, which is why everyone fears them a little. You move through a side passage and end up near a set of scales. A man weighs something, and another man watches like the future of his children depends on the balance. It probably does. Resources here are precious, but not in a romantic scarcity way, in a practical scarcity way. Water can be stolen, grain can spoil, a canal can silt up, a bad harvest can ripple through the city like a slow disaster. The gods are involved in all of it, not because the people are silly, but because when your whole life depends on forces you cannot fully control. You give those forces names and relationships. You catch a glimpse into a room where offerings are being prepared, bread loaves, beer, perhaps dates. You smell something sweet and yeasty. Someone lays out food with care, and the care is not performative. It is duty. The gods are treated as real recipients. The statue in the sanctuary is the focal point, but the whole system is the body. Offerings move through the temple like blood through veins. Some of it becomes ceremonial consumption. Some of it becomes redistribution. It is not a scam in the simple way people like to imagine. It is a complex social machine that keeps workers fed. supports widows and dependents in some cases, and anchors the temple's authority. You notice something else that matters for replacement. The people who control the flow of offerings and rations control the flow of prestige. If your god's temple is rich, your god looks powerful. If your god's festivals are lavish, your god looks generous. If your god's priests are respected, your god feels present. So the hierarchy of gods is braided into the hierarchy of institutions. Now, you drift toward the canal again, and you watch a team of workers clearing debris. They're ankle-deep, and their movements are rhythmic, practiced. This is not glamorous labor. This is survival labor. A canal that clogs is a field that dries. A field that dries is a family that starves. So the city organizes labor through obligations, corvée work, and temple assignments. And because the temple is central to this organization, the gods become central to the story of why you are doing it. You are not just clearing silt. You are maintaining the order that the gods require. This is where the calm city-state logic becomes almost soothing. The system tells you there is a reason for your work. There is a structure to reality. There is a divine patron who sees you. It is emotionally stabilizing, like having a teacher who insists the lesson plan exists, even if the classroom is chaos. You might not get a vacation, but you get cosmic meaning. And in a world where life can be knocked sideways by drought or war, cosmic meaning is not a luxury. It is a stabilizer. Historians still argue whether temple economies should be understood as primarily religious institutions that happened to do economic work, or primarily economic institutions that used religion to legitimize and organize themselves. Some scholars stress genuine devotion, the sense that people truly believe the deity is present and deserves offerings. Others stress the administrative reality, pointing out how temple records show a vast system of labor and storage that functions like a proto-state. And of course, it can be both, because humans are very good at believing and budgeting at the same time. You pause near a wall where a few men are talking quietly. One mentions that the city over the river had a better harvest, and another mutters that their god must be pleased. This is how the logic spreads. Prosperity equals divine favor. Divine favor equals divine rank. Divine rank equals political confidence, and political confidence affects diplomacy, alliances, and the willingness to follow a leader. You can already see how, if a city like Babylon rises later, it will want its god to rise too, because a god is not just a deity. A god is a banner, a brand, a claim that the universe endorses your city's expansion. Here comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, soft and nighttime friendly. You hear a whispered story about how certain priests can read the will of the gods not only in omens, but in the way smoke curls from incense, or in the pattern of bubbles in beer. Is that fringe? It is not exactly fringe for them, but it sits in that fuzzy zone between official ritual and personal technique. A man swears that if the smoke splits into two streams, it means the god is undecided, and you should not start a new building project. Another insists it means your mother-in-law is visiting, which is obviously the most dangerous omen of all. That is joke number 2. And you can almost hear someone snort and laugh behind a sleeve. You keep walking, and your mind starts organizing itself around a simple principle. Gods are linked to resources, not in a cynical way, but in a structural way. The deity's temple controls land and labor. The deity's festivals create public cohesion. The deity's myths explain why the city's structure is righteous. So when a new god rises, part of what is happening is that his institutional base is growing. He is getting more land, more offerings, more scribes copying his hymns, more festivals that make him feel inevitable. You pass a small tablet workshop, and you see a trainee practicing wedge marks. His tongue sticks out in concentration. and you feel a warm tenderness for him because he is learning a skill that will outlast kings. Clay tablets will be baked accidentally in fires, preserved for millennia, and you, somehow, are watching the early drafts of history. The scribal class is not just recording the economy. They are recording which gods matter. They are making choices about names, titles, epithets. They are, in the quietest way, curating the cosmos. Your third light joke lands in your mind as you watch him. You think. Imagine being the first person to invent the concept of inventory and accidentally creating religion's worst enemy, the audit. But in truth, the audit is also religion's best friend here. Because being recorded means being real. Being written means being remembered. Being remembered means being honored. And honored gods rise. You stop near the canal one more time. The water is slow, dark, confident. You hear frogs, and you see a lantern reflected like a small floating star. The city's rhythm is steady. The gods, for now, feel stable, because the system that supports them is stable. But you can also see the hinge. If the system shifts, if power concentrates, if a city becomes dominant, then the divine paperwork will shift with it. New titles will be added. Old roles will be merged. The pantheon will not explode. It will reorganize, like a calm office restructuring that everyone pretends is not political. And as you head back toward the sleeping rooftops, you carry this with you. Replacement is not a lightning strike. It is a series of administrative decisions, ritual emphasis, and narrative updates that feel natural because the city needs them to feel natural. When Marduk rises later, you will recognize the pattern. You will hear it in the scribes' lists, in the festival budgets, in the way people casually say a god's name as if it has always been at the top. You do not really leave the temple district so much as you drift away from it the way smoke drifts from incense, still connected, still scented. The city is half asleep now, and you are walking along a street that feels cooler under your feet, the bricks releasing their stored heat like a slow sigh. Somewhere behind a wall, someone laughs once, abruptly, like they just remembered a joke they were saving for tomorrow. You keep moving, because the next piece of the calm explanation is not inside one city. It is between cities. In a landscape like this, a city-state is a person with a name, a pride, and a patron. Each one believes it is the center of the world, because from inside its walls, it basically is. But the rivers do not care about civic pride. Trade routes do not care either. And the horizon, that huge flat horizon, keeps reminding you that there are other city walls out there, other temples, other gods with their own well-fed reputations. You walk toward the city gate at dawn, not because you are fleeing, but because the morning is when the roads feel safest. The sky turns pale, and the first birds start doing that thing where they sound like they are complaining about the concept of morning itself. You pass guards who barely look at you, because everyone looks tired here, and tiredness is basically a uniform. Outside the walls, the air is open and damp. You can smell the fields. You can smell the river. You can smell the specific hope and anxiety of people who bet their whole year on crops. The road is hard-packed, with ruts from carts. You walk past a small shrine, just a niche with a few offerings, and you realize how religion follows movement, even outside the walls. The gods have outposts. You pass other travelers, some with donkeys, some with baskets, and you catch snatches of speech that mention different gods in different tones. One man swears by the storm god with the casual confidence of someone who has survived bad weather. Another mutters a prayer to a goddess of healing because his child is coughing. The pantheon is not abstract, it is like a toolbox. People reach for the name that fits the problem. Now you come to the first mainstream historical fact of this section. Mesopotamia, in many periods, is a mosaic of competing city-states, and political competition often expresses itself through religious prestige, with each city elevating its patron deity and sponsoring temples, festivals, and inscriptions to reinforce legitimacy. You feel it in the way travelers talk. The gods are not only spiritual beings, they are badges, they are passports, they are a language of power. You stop at a market settlement along the road, a place where people exchange goods and rumors. Rumors are basically the second currency here, and sometimes the first. You see wool being traded, jars of oil, maybe copper that has traveled from far away. And you hear talk of another city building a bigger wall, another city hiring more soldiers, another city sending gifts to secure an alliance. None of this is separated from the divine. Every treaty is sworn by gods. Every victory is credited to God. Every humiliation is framed as divine displeasure, or, more realistically, as our God was testing us, which is the ancient version of saying, "This is fine," while everything is on fire. You drink water that tastes like clay and sunlight, and you listen. A merchant says that a neighboring city's king has been boasting that his patron deity granted him dominion over surrounding lands. Another merchant rolls his eyes and says, "Basically, sure, and my donkey is a royal advisor. That is joke number one, and it lands because you have met the donkey, and the donkey does have opinions." This is where you start to see the mechanism of replacement in slow motion. In a world of city-states, gods compete because cities compete, not because the gods are petty, but because people use them to structure political reality. If your city conquers another, you can interpret it as your god proving superiority. If your city becomes an economic hub, you can interpret it as your god being wiser, stronger, more generous. Over time, those interpretations harden into myth, ritual, and hierarchy. You continue down the road and arrive at a place where you can see two cities in the distance on different days of travel. You cannot see both at once clearly, but you can feel them as presences. Each has its temple, each has its patron deity, each has scribes writing lists, priests preparing offerings, rulers justifying decisions. When one city-state rises, it does not just raise its walls, it raises its god's reputation. And here comes the open, scholarly debate phrase, sliding in like a calm voice in the back of your mind. Historians still argue whether intercity religious competition is best understood as deliberate propaganda, engineered by rulers, or as a more organic process where people naturally identify civic success with divine favor. Some point to royal inscriptions that very clearly push a deity's greatness as a political message. Others point to the slow diffusion of cult practices through trade and marriage, suggesting a more gradual blending. Either way, the outcome is similar. The god's seating chart changes when the political seating chart changes. You reach a small canal crossing where travelers wait their turn. A man ahead of you wears a pendant with a symbol that marks his city's patron. It is not flashy, but it is a statement. Another traveler notices it and makes a little comment that sounds friendly on the surface, but carries an edge. You can feel the rivalry in the air, like static. The man with the pendant responds politely, but you can tell he wants to say, "Yes, and our God actually answers prayers. Unlike yours, he does not say it because this is a road, and roads require diplomacy. But you can sense the impulse. You think about how this rivalry could scale up. If a city like Babylon becomes dominant later, it will not be enough for Babylon to win militarily. Babylon will want cosmic recognition. It will want a mythic explanation that says, "Our city deserves to lead because our god is the leader." This is not just ego. It is governance. People obey more easily when the universe seems to endorse the chain of command. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit that you overhear at a roadside fire. Someone tells a story about how gods literally travel in the night, visiting other cities to spy, negotiate, or steal sacred powers. It is said in a half-joking way, but the storyteller's eyes are serious. He claims a priest once saw a deity's shadow crossing the fields, like a tall, moving darkness that made the crops bend. Is it true? You have no way to verify. But it shows something important. People imagine the divine world as political too. They imagine gods forming alliances, making grudges, shifting loyalties. In that imagination, a god's rise is not only human manipulation, it is also cosmic drama. You sit with the travelers and share bread. It is coarse, but filling. The firelight makes everyone's faces look softer. You hear them discuss temples as if they are embassies. You hear them mention that when cities exchange gifts, they often exchange offerings and votive items as well. Sometimes a city will acknowledge another city's deity in a treaty, not because they convert, but because they recognize power. It is like adding someone to your contact list because you do not want to miss their calls. Joke number 2 slips in when you imagine a scribe chiseling a treaty and thinking, great. Now I have to spell 12 divine names correctly, or we all get cursed. You can practically hear the sigh. In a world where writing is sacred and mistakes matter, the pressure is real. As you walk again, the landscape opens into fields and then into a stretch of marshy land where reeds whisper. You see small boats, you see fishermen, you see the quiet economy that supports the big political games. And you understand something calming. Rivalry is constant, but it is also normalized. People adapt. They learn how to speak about gods in ways that keep the peace. They might praise their own deity while still showing respect to others. They might treat foreign gods as real but regional, like weather patterns. Yes, that storm god is fierce, but he is fierce over there. This flexible attitude is crucial for later replacement. If people can accept that many gods exist and that each city has a patron, then they can also accept that one god can become more universal when one city becomes more universal. Universal. Here, it does not mean exclusive. It means higher ranked. It means more titles, more authority, more assumed relevance. You return toward your original city-state after days of walking, your sandals now properly dusted with the evidence of distance. As the walls come into view, you feel how comforting the familiar skyline is. You also feel, now, how fragile it is. A city-state's autonomy can be lost in a season of war. A dynasty can end. A temple can be plundered. And when those things happen, the gods move in the hierarchy. Not necessarily because anyone stops believing in them, but because belief is not the only currency. Power is. Joke number 3 arrives as you imagine the gods watching city-states squabble and thinking, children, please, I left you in charge for 5 minutes. It is funny, but it also hints at the ancient mindset. The gods are like parents, like rulers, like forces. People mirror their own political reality upward into the heavens. So when politics centralize, the heavens centralize. You step back inside the gates at sunset, and the city feels the same, but you are not the same. You have seen the web that connects cities, trade, rivalry, treaties, and divine prestige. You understand now that Marduk's later rise will not be a random religious accident. It will be the cosmic reflection of a city's success, a theological way of saying, we are on top. Therefore, our God is on top. And as you walk toward the temple district again, you can already feel the future tugging gently at the edges of the present, like a new name being rehearsed quietly before it becomes the official headline. You slip back into the city like a returning breath. And the first thing you notice is how quickly your body remembers routines. The narrow lanes, the smell of cooking, the way people step aside without thinking when a cart rattles through. It is comforting. It is also a reminder that cities are habits turned into architecture, and habits, once built, are hard to change. That is why the rise of a god is never just a story. It is a retraining of habit, a slow reweighting of attention. You keep walking, and the conversation you overheard on the road keeps echoing in your head. City-states compete, gods compete. It is not personal, it is structural. But now, instead of hovering over the abstract idea, you let your mind narrow down to one place that will matter soon: Babylon. Not yet the juggernaut that later generations whisper about. Not yet the name that makes scribes straighten their backs. But you can feel it coming, like the first tremor before a big cart rolls past. You are not in Babylon physically this second, but you begin to picture it through rumors and through the logic you have already learned. A city grows when it sits in the right place, when it controls the right roads, when it can gather grain, labor, and loyalty without collapsing into chaos. Babylon sits along the Euphrates in a way that makes it a natural crossroads, and as the political landscape shifts, Babylon starts to become less of a regional town and more of a gravitational field. This is your mainstream historical fact for the section Babylon's Political Rise, especially under rulers like Hammurabi in the early 2nd millennium BCE, corresponds with the increasing prominence of its patron deity, Marduk. The city's power and the god's prestige rise together, braided like two ropes. Even if you do not memorize dates, you can remember the pattern. When Babylon becomes louder on the political stage, Marduk becomes louder in the cosmic one. You walk past a courtyard where a group of children are playing a chasing game that looks suspiciously like a tiny war reenactment. One of them declares himself king and immediately starts giving impossible orders. Another child rolls his eyes and still follows him. Congratulations, you are watching politics being practiced in miniature. Joke number 1 is you thinking, wow, the administrative spirit is hereditary. You turn toward the temple district again, and you imagine what it means for a rising city to need a rising god. A city's patron deity is not a mascot. The deity is the legal and cosmic justification for the city's authority. If a ruler wants to unify newly conquered territories, he needs a story that is bigger than "because I said so." He needs a story that says, the universe chose this. The universe is organized this way. Your taxes are not tribute to a mere man. They are participation in cosmic order. So Babylon, as it grows, begins to speak more loudly in the language of legitimacy. It builds, it fortifies, it draws scribes and priests who can craft the right inscriptions. And gradually, it also begins to position Marduk in ways that make him feel more than local. Not necessarily universal in the sense of only God, but universal in the sense of chief God. The one whose authority can stretch over other cities because Babylon's authority stretches over them. You imagine the old gods watching this like senior officials in a government office where a younger manager is suddenly being promoted. Some are offended. Some are resigned. Some are quietly relieved because now they can focus on their niche responsibilities without being asked to solve every crisis. Joke number 2 is you picturing an ancient deity saying, honestly, let him take the emails, I'm done. It is silly, but it helps you feel the shift as something human-scaled. You walk along the edge of the temple complex and see a new plaque being mounted. You cannot read it fully, but you recognize the posture of the workers, the careful way they align it. Inscriptions are not casual decoration. They are messages to humans and to gods. A new inscription that praises a deity, lists his titles, credits him with victories or prosperity, is part of the machinery that raises that deity's rank. Historians still argue whether Babylon's religious elevation of Marduk is primarily a calculated act of statecraft, or whether it reflects a genuine shift in popular devotion that rulers then harness. Some scholars point out that royal ideology often needs a central god to unify diverse populations. Others note that cult practices and myths can grow in influence in ways that are not strictly controlled, especially as people move, intermarry, and share rituals. Either way, the result is the same. As Babylon rises, Marduk becomes more relevant to more people. And relevance is half of divinity in a practical world. You stop near a group of older men sitting by a wall. They are sipping beer from straws, and their conversation is slow, looping, comfortable. One mentions Babylon with a faint tone of annoyance, like someone talking about a neighbor whose house renovations are getting a little too ambitious. They're building again, he says. Always building. Another replies that their god must be hungry for glory. You can hear the half-joke, but also the underlying truth. A city's building projects are offerings to its future. When a city builds big, it signals confidence. And confidence, in this worldview, is contagious. People start to speak as if the city's rise is destiny, and destiny is the territory of gods. Now you hear a fringe-leaning whisper, the kind that thrives in beer conversations and late nights. Someone says Babylon's priests have a special way of stacking names, giving Marduk titles that used to belong to other deities, like a collector claiming all the rare stamps. They suggest that if you call Marduk by enough names, you're basically calling every god at once, like a divine group chat. Is that an official theological position? Not yet, not cleanly. But it shows you the direction the wind is blowing. People are experimenting with language to make one god feel bigger, broader, more encompassing. You smile, because you have seen this before in other human systems. When an institution expands, job titles change. Assistant Canal Overseer becomes Regional Water Coordination Director. Same person, bigger name, more authority, more implied importance. This is what happens with gods, too. They gain epithets. They absorb functions. They get credited with things they did not used to be credited with. And as those credits pile up, it becomes harder to imagine the world without them. Joke number 3 slips in when you picture a scribe running out of tablet space because Marduk's title list is too long, and having to invent a smaller font. It is funny, but it also captures the reality. The expansion of divine titles is a visible sign of changing hierarchy. You walk toward the river at dusk, and you let the city's sounds wrap around you. There is a subtle shift in the air, a sense that the political map is never still. In some years, one city dominates. In other years, another does. But the idea of dominance itself is becoming more feasible as larger kingdoms form and rulers consolidate. This is the wider context that makes Babylon's rise plausible. It is not only Babylon being ambitious, it is the whole region experimenting with bigger political units, bigger claims, bigger stories. You look at the temple silhouette against the sky and imagine Babylon's temple growing too, its rituals becoming more elaborate, its festivals drawing more visitors, its scribes producing more texts that circulate. The god becomes portable through writing and through ritual. People hear his name in treaties, in victory boasts, in hymns. They start to associate him with stability, law, kingship, and once a god becomes associated with those things, he becomes hard to dislodge. Because who wants to pray to a deity who is not in charge when you live under a government that insists it is? You return to the city's inner streets, and you notice small changes. A new song fragment, a casual mention of Babylon in a conversation about trade, a comment about how their laws are strict. It is the early stage of cultural gravity, the kind where you do not yet feel conquered, but you feel influenced. You begin to understand that Marduk's rise will not arrive as a thunderclap. It will arrive as an increase in references, an increase in prestige, an increase in assumed importance. Until one day you look up and realize the cosmos has a new center, and everyone is acting like it has always been that way. And as night settles, you carry the image of Babylon not as a distant exotic place, but as an emerging hub of administration, myth-making, and political ambition. The city is learning to speak loudly, and when a city learns to speak loudly, its God learns to speak even louder. You keep that image of Babylon in your mind like a warm stone in your pocket. Not heavy, exactly, but present. As you move through the sleeping city, you realize that the real miracle is not that gods change places in the hierarchy. The miracle is that the change can feel so polite, so administrative, like everyone agreed to it in a meeting you are not invited to. Morning arrives with the soft chaos of chores. Doors open, water is fetched. Someone shouts a name, and it echoes down a lane like a thrown pebble. You find yourself back near the temple complex, because this is where job descriptions are written, not on papyrus resumes, but in ritual repetition. If a god becomes more important, you will see it here first, not as a sudden proclamation, but as an accumulation of tasks. This section's mainstream historical fact is simple and crucial. In Mesopotamian religion, deities often have overlapping functions, and over time a prominent god can absorb roles, titles, and epithets associated with other gods, especially as political power concentrates. You are watching a system that is flexible enough to survive political change by reassigning divine responsibilities rather than shattering them. You step into a courtyard where priests are preparing for daily service. Someone is carrying a basin. Someone else is arranging incense. A singer is clearing his throat like he is about to perform for the universe itself. Which, to be fair, he is. You do not hear Marduk's name constantly here yet, not in every city, not at every temple. But you can feel the idea of a deity gaining job duties as a thing that is already culturally acceptable. Gods can be promoted. Gods can be given new titles. Gods can be asked to cover for other gods, like divine shift work. You listen to a litany being recited. The cadence is hypnotic. Names, then epithets, then what the god does, then what the god grants. In a modern ear, it might sound repetitive. In a Mesopotamian ear, repetition is power. It is reinforcement. It is how reality is kept in place. If you say protector of the city every day, the city begins to feel protected. If you say judge of truth every day, truth begins to feel like a stable thing you can appeal to. So when Marduk begins to collect epithets, it matters. It is not mere poetry. It is the scaffolding of authority. You stop near a scribe who is copying a hymn. His stylus taps softly, the way raindrops tap on a roof. You watch him write a divine name, then a title, then another title. You imagine how easily a title can migrate. Today it belongs to one god. Tomorrow it is appended to another, maybe with a slight tweak, a respectful nod. This is how replacement can happen without open rebellion. You do not have to declare an older god false. You just have to treat his specialty as something the rising god also handles, perhaps even better. First light joke? You imagine a god getting a new title and thinking, do I get extra rations for this? Or is it just more responsibility? It is silly, but you can feel how the system works. Titles are currency. Titles are claims. Titles are promotional posters in the cosmic hallway. You move deeper into the temple grounds and see a small cluster of people bringing offerings. Their faces are serious in that quiet, everyday way. One woman whispers a request under her breath. Another touches a charm at her neck. They are not thinking about pantheon politics. They are thinking about sick children, leaky roofs, and whether the harvest will be kind. This is important because it reminds you that big religious shifts have to land in the lives of ordinary people. If a god rises but cannot deliver on daily anxieties, he will not stick. So when Marduk rises, part of his job description expansion is that he becomes the sort of god people can approach for many needs, not just a narrow civic function. Now the calm city-state explanation gets even calmer. Imagine the pantheon like a set of departments in a city administration. There is a department for storms, a department for wisdom, a department for fertility, a department for justice. In a fragmented political world, each city has its own office building, so to speak, and each department reports to its own patron deity in its own city. But when one city becomes dominant, there is pressure to centralize. Centralization reduces friction. It makes treaties easier. It makes ideology simpler. So the dominant city's patron deity begins to act like the head administrator, the one whose signature is needed on everything. That is what Marduk becomes. A god with a wide portfolio, not because everyone suddenly forgets the old gods, but because it is convenient, politically and ritually, for one god to embody the authority of the dominant city. This is why you can call it bureaucratic consolidation. It is not romantic, but it is accurate. Historians still argue whether this process of role absorption is primarily a theological evolution driven by priestly creativity, or a political imposition driven by kings who want a unifying ideology. Some scholars emphasize the creativity of the scribal and priestly class, who can weave traditions together in ways that feel seamless. Others emphasize that temples and priests do not operate in a vacuum. They respond to patronage, and patronage often follows royal power. Again, the likely answer is both. The machine runs on belief and budgets. You wander toward a side room where divine objects are kept. You cannot enter the innermost sanctuary, but you can sense it like a closed door with a presence behind it. The deity's statue is treated as alive, clothed, washed, perfumed, fed. If Marduk becomes king of the gods, that kingship has to be felt in ritual. The statue has to be honored accordingly. More attendants, finer garments, more elaborate processions, more public moments where everyone sees that Marduk is treated like the top authority. Here comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, whispered by a junior temple worker who is trying to sound worldly. He says some priests claim that the true power is not in the statue, but in the name. That if you know the god's real name, the hidden one beneath the titles, you could theoretically compel attention, like dialing a private number. He says it with a grin, like he knows it is half spooky and half showmanship. But it reveals something. Names and titles are treated as active forces. If Marduk gains many names, many epithets, it makes him feel like he has many access points into reality. He becomes the god you can reach for anything, because he has a name for every situation. Second joke. You imagine someone trying to remember all of Marduk's titles and giving up halfway. Like, Great Lord of... stuff. You know who you are. And you can almost hear the divine eye roll. You step back into the courtyard and watch a ritual assistant pour a libation. The liquid darkens the earth. The gesture is small, but it carries weight. You think about how, When Marduk's job description expands, it will not only show up in big myths, it will show up in these small gestures. Repeated, a libation offered for Marduk in contexts where it used to be offered to another deity. A prayer phrased in a way that credits Marduk with authority over areas he did not previously dominate. Over time, that repetition rewires the intuitive sense of who is in charge. And importantly, the older gods do not vanish. In many cases, they remain. But their roles become nested. They become advisors, specialists, regional managers in the divine hierarchy. Their worship continues, but the cosmic narrative frames them as operating under the umbrella of the new chief. This is why replacement can look like continuity. People can still honor older gods and still accept Marduk's supremacy, because the system offers a place for everyone. It is not a purge. It is a reorg. Third joke, you picture a divine org chart being etched into a tablet, with the storm god frowning because he got moved to senior weather consultant. Again, silly, but the humor helps you see the human logic behind theological shifts. As the day warms, you leave the temple area and walk along a canal. Water moves steadily. It does not care which god is top ranked today, but the people care, because ranking affects legitimacy. Ranking affects which temple gets rebuilt first after a flood. Ranking affects which festivals get funded and which hymns get copied. Ranking affects which god's name is sworn in treaties and which god is invoked when a king takes the throne. And you carry the heart of this section with you. Marduk's rise is not just about replacing older gods. It is about becoming the god who can do their jobs too. At least in the public story, it is about creating a divine figure big enough to match Babylon's political footprint. It is about turning a city's success into a cosmic career ladder, where the deity climbs by collecting responsibilities, titles, and the quiet assumption that if you want something done in the universe, you go through him. You leave the temple district with the faint smell of incense still clinging to your hair, like the world's gentlest reminder that someone, somewhere, is always keeping the gods company. The city is fully awake now. People are moving with purpose, and purpose in a city-state is like a shared rhythm. The canal workers, the bakers, the scribes, the guards, they all act as if the schedule is sacred, because it is. And if there is one place where you can feel the schedule becoming cosmic theater, it is the New Year festival. You do not need fireworks to mark a new year. You need water, grain, and timing. In Mesopotamia, the new year is tied to agricultural cycles and the sense that the world must be renewed, reauthorized, and restabilized. You can almost taste the tension beneath the celebration. A new year is not just another calendar page. It is a moment when people collectively ask, are we still safe? Are the gods still on our side? Is the king still legitimate? And, quietly, which god is currently holding the top seat? This section's mainstream historical fact is that Babylon's Akitu, the New Year festival, becomes a major public ritual where kingship and the authority of the city's patron deity are ritually reaffirmed. It is not a private priestly event. It is civic theater. And civic theater is how you teach a population what to feel true. You arrive at the festival space as if you are being carried by the crowd. People are dressed a little better than usual. Not all of them, because poverty does not take holidays, but enough that the streets look brighter. Vendors call out. Children weave through legs. Someone is already overeating, and you respect the commitment. Joke number 1. You think, yes, celebrate the new year by immediately regretting your choices. Timeless tradition. The city feels like it is holding its breath. Because it kind of is. The Akitu is a ritual of renewal, and in Babylon it becomes a ritual of Marduk's supremacy. But you do not see that as a blunt slogan. You see it as an arranged sequence of moments where Marduk is centered, displayed, praised, and assumed. The older gods are not necessarily insulted. They are simply not the focus. And in public life, focus is power. You stand near a processional route. You can smell crushed reeds underfoot and the sharp tang of sweat. Someone bumps you and mutters an apology. In the distance, drums start. Slow, measured. The sound is not there to entertain you. It is there to synchronize you. The city moves together, and when a city moves together, its beliefs can be nudged, shaped, and reinstalled like a well-rehearsed song. Here is where the calm city-state explanation becomes very clear. A yearly festival is an opportunity to reprogram legitimacy. Every year, you gather people, you tell the story of order overcoming chaos. You show the king being humbled and then restored. And you show the patron god as the guarantor of all of it. If you want to raise a god's rank, you do it here, in the rhythm that people expect, in the moment when they are emotionally open to being reassured. The procession begins. Priests move with solemn precision. Sacred objects are carried. The divine statue, or a representation of the deity, is treated as a presence moving through the city. And the crowd's reaction is not casual. People bow their heads. Some reach out as if to touch the air. You feel goosebumps rise, and you're not even sure why. It is the collective attention, the way everyone agrees, for these hours, that the god is near. Now you notice the king's role. In Babylon's tradition, the king participates in rituals that can include symbolic humiliation and reaffirmation, emphasizing that he is not the ultimate power. The god is. The king is the god's chosen steward. This is politically brilliant. It tells the people, your ruler is accountable to something higher. It also tells the elite, your ruler is sanctioned by the highest thing there is. The king becomes both humbled and protected by the same ritual. Historians still argue whether the ritual humiliation elements in the Akitu should be interpreted as genuine constraints on royal power, or as carefully staged performances that ultimately strengthen kingship by dramatizing its divine approval. Some emphasize that ritual can be a real social check, a moment when the king must publicly submit. Others emphasize that the outcome is predetermined. The king always returns to legitimacy, and the ritual is a display of control rather than a surrender of it. Either way, the people leave with the sense that order has been restored. You watch the crowd, and you realize something that matters for the replacement question. People do not sit down and vote Marduk into office. They absorb Marduk's authority through repeated public experiences. If every year the new year is renewed through Marduk, then Marduk becomes the god of renewal, the god of kingship, the god of cosmic stability. Even if older gods still exist, their centrality fades in the city's emotional calendar, and the emotional calendar is what people remember. Here comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, whispered by an enthusiastic festival-goer who is a little too excited for a ritual about cosmic order. He claims that during Akitu, the boundary between divine and human becomes thin enough that you can sometimes hear the god's answer in the crowd, not with words, but with sudden gusts of wind, or a bird landing at the perfect moment, or a flicker of torchlight that looks like a nod. He says he once saw a torch flame bend toward the statue like it was bowing. Is that a reliable report? Probably not, but it reveals how people experience these rituals as alive. The festival is not just performance. It is a moment when people expect the universe to react. Second joke, you imagine the gods watching the festival like celebrities at a parade, thinking, yes, yes. The applause is appropriate. keep going. It makes you smile. But it also underscores the point. The festival is designed to produce awe. Awe is a resource. Awe is political capital. You follow the procession to a special building outside the city walls, or associated with the festival route, where the drama of renewal unfolds. The air feels different here, as if the city's usual chatter has been replaced by ritual gravity. People speak in quiet tones. You can hear the scrape of sandals. You can hear the occasional cough, which in this silence sounds like a scandal. The central story being enacted is order versus chaos. The new year must be won again. And in Babylon's version, Marduk is the champion of order. This matters because it provides a cosmic explanation for Babylon's dominance. If Marduk is the one who defeats chaos, and Babylon is Marduk's city, then Babylon's leadership is framed as necessary for the world's stability. It is not arrogance. It is responsibility. That is how it is sold. You step back and look at the faces around you. Some are truly moved. Some look bored. Some are anxious. Most are simply participating because participation is what a citizen does. And that is the most powerful thing. The ritual does not need everyone to be ecstatic. It needs everyone to show up, to witness, to accept the sequence of legitimacy. Over time, that shared witnessing becomes memory, and memory becomes tradition. Third joke. You imagine a child tugging his mother's sleeve and whispering, "Is this the part where the year updates?" And the mother hissing, "Shh, the cosmos can hear you." It is funny, but it also captures the vibe. People treat the ritual as functional, like it actually does something, like it is a lever that moves the invisible machinery of time. As the day progresses, the city's energy shifts from suspense to relief. Food is shared. People relax. Laughter returns. The new year feels approved, and in that approval, Marduk's status is reinforced without a single debate. It is simply enacted, witnessed, repeated. The old gods, in this context, are still respected, still present in private prayers and specialized rituals. But the public heartbeat of the year is now aligned with Babylon's patron. You walk away from the festival route with your senses full, dust on your skin, music in your ears, the aftertaste of beer, and you understand that this is one of the most effective ways a god can rise, not by argument, but by calendar, not by conquest alone, but by ceremony that makes conquest feel like cosmic housekeeping. As night falls, lanterns flicker along the streets, and you feel the city settling into the new year with that same old rhythm of work and water. The gods have been fed, the king has been affirmed, and Marduk's name has been carried through the crowd like a banner. This is how replacement happens in a calm city-state world. You renew the year through one god often enough that everyone forgets it was ever otherwise. You carry the Akitu rhythm in your body for days afterward. The way you carry the echo of a concert even when your ears have stopped ringing. The city returns to normal, but the normal now has a subtle stamp on it, like fresh clay pressed with a seal. Marduk's presence feels slightly louder, not because anyone is shouting, but because the calendar just did the talking for him. And now you drift toward the place where calendars and crowds become words. The scribal house, the tablet room, the quiet workshop where myths are not just told, but fixed, copied, and made portable. Because the next step in a god's rise is not only ritual, it is narrative. If you want a deity to replace older gods without open revolt, you write a story that makes the replacement feel like the world's natural order. You step into a space that smells like damp clay and reed styluses. A few lamps burn with steady flames. The light is soft, almost sleepy. It makes the room feel like a womb for ideas. Scribes sit in rows, some practicing signs, some copying texts, some murmuring lines under their breath. The sound is gentle. Tap, press, scrape, breathe. You realize these people are doing something so ordinary and so powerful that it makes your modern brain itch. They are deciding what will be remembered. This section's mainstream historical fact is that the Babylonian creation epic, often called Enuma Elish, becomes a central text associated with Marduk's supremacy, and it is recited in ritual contexts such as the New Year festival. The text is not simply entertainment, it is ideological architecture. It explains why Marduk is king of the gods. It explains why Babylon is central. It turns political reality into cosmic inevitability. You sit quietly in the back, trying not to be the awkward person who breathes too loudly in a room full of sacred concentration. Joke number 1. You think. Imagine being so powerful you can change the universe with a poem, and then you still have to worry about spelling. Truly humbling. A senior scribe begins to recite lines to a trainee. The words feel older than the room, even if they are being copied in this specific moment. You do not need to know every line to feel the shape. There is a beginning where primordial forces exist, messy, undifferentiated. There is conflict, there is a rise of a champion, and there is order established with authority. In Babylon's version, that champion is Marduk. The story positions him as the one who defeats chaos, organizes the cosmos, and earns the right to rule. You can feel how useful this is. If Marduk is the cosmic organizer, then Babylon, his city, is associated with order. If Babylon is order, then resisting Babylon is resisting the stable arrangement of the universe. It is a brilliant bit of mythic framing, and it is done without needing to insult every older god directly. Many older deities remain present in the story, but their status becomes secondary. They become witnesses, supporters, or beneficiaries of Marduk's victory. Their importance is acknowledged, but it is nested beneath his authority. Historians still argue whether Enuma Elish should be read primarily as a theological statement reflecting long-standing religious development, or as a relatively late piece of political theology crafted to support Babylon's imperial ambitions. Some see it as a culmination of earlier traditions, reshaped but not invented from nothing. Others emphasize its function in elevating Marduk and Babylon, suggesting it is tightly bound to historical moments when Babylon needed ideological reinforcement. The debate is calm, like scholars sipping tea while arguing about the universe. You watch the scribes, and you notice something subtle. Even copying is interpretation. A scribe chooses which version to copy, which signs to use, how to arrange lines. Over time, these choices stabilize one form of a story as the story. And once a story becomes the story, it feels ancient, even if it was curated. This is how replacement becomes tradition. You do not only tell people that Marduk is supreme. You give them a text that explains why it has always made sense for him to be supreme. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, and it is the kind that lives comfortably in a room full of scribes. You hear a trainee whisper that some signs have hidden values, that the shape of a sign can hint at deeper meaning beyond the spoken word. He claims the gods can read the clay directly, not needing the human voice, and that a well-written tablet is like a perfectly tuned instrument. Again, is this official doctrine? Not neatly. But in a culture where writing feels like power captured in matter, it is easy to believe that the stylist does more than record. It participates. Second joke. You imagine the gods hovering over the tablet room like strict teachers, tapping the edge of a desk and saying, "No, that wedge is crooked. Fix it." The scribes would probably agree. Their discipline is intense because errors can have consequences, not only social but sacred. You lean closer as the senior scribe explains the meaning of a passage. He emphasizes Marduk's names and titles. This matters because in Enuma Elish, Marduk is granted many names, each reflecting a function, a power, a domain. This is not random. It is a narrative way of absorbing other gods' roles into Marduk's identity. Each name is like a legal decree. Each title is like an administrative mandate. If Marduk holds the name that controls a domain, then Marduk holds the domain. And you realize that the story is doing the same thing the temple economy did, just in a different medium. The economy consolidates resources under Babylon's institutions. The myth consolidates cosmic authority under Babylon's god. One is grain and labor. The other is words and memory. Together, they make a system that feels unshakable. You step outside for air and find yourself in a courtyard where a young scribe is kneading clay. His hands are coated. His nails are dark with the earth. He looks up at you and smiles briefly, then goes back to work. He is making the raw material of ideology. It is such a calm, ordinary act that it almost feels like a lullaby. Clay, water, hands, the future. You walk back in and listen again. The senior scribe speaks of chaos as something that must be contained, not negotiated with. In a city-state world where floods and war can feel like chaos incarnate, this resonates. People crave containment. They crave a reason to believe the world will not unravel. So a story that says Marduk defeated chaos and set boundaries is psychologically soothing. It is also politically convenient. Third joke. You imagine chaos itself listening and saying, "Wow, rude," before being politely escorted out by cosmic security. It is silly, but it highlights the way myths personify forces. Chaos becomes an enemy you can defeat, not a reality you must endure. You sit with the scribes long enough that you begin to feel the trance of repetition. The same lines, copied again and again, become grooves in the mind. They become the phrases people quote in ritual, the metaphors rulers borrow in inscriptions, the imagery priests weave into sermons. And because the text is tied to a public festival like Akitu, it is not locked in this room. It travels out into the streets through recitation. It becomes communal memory. This is why Enuma Elish can function like city policy. It tells you who is in charge and why. It ties cosmic order to Babylon's institutions. It gives the king a script: rule as Marduk's steward, uphold order, defeat chaos. It gives the priests a script: serve Marduk as supreme, recite his victory, renew his authority annually. It gives the people a script: accept Babylon's dominance as part of the world's design. And the older gods, they remain. They are not deleted. They are repositioned. The story makes space for them, but it makes Marduk the hinge. Over time, that hinge becomes the default. You can still honor other deities, but you do it within a framework where Marduk is the king. It is like living in a kingdom where local governors exist, but everyone knows whose face is on the seal. You leave the scribal house as evening returns, the sky turning soft and bruised with color. The city smells of cooking again. The canal reflects stars. You feel a strange tenderness for the scribes, these quiet architects of belief. They are not plotting in a villainous way. They are doing what their world requires, making sense, making order, making legitimacy portable. And you understand now that Marduk's rise is not only a political story or a ritual story, it is also a literary story. A myth can be a map. It can show people where to place themselves. And once that map is copied enough times, it stops looking like a map and starts looking like the landscape itself. You leave the scribal house with that damp clay smell still in your nostrils, and it follows you down the lane like an invisible ribbon. The sky is darker now, the kind of dark that makes lanterns look like tiny suns trying their best. People are settling into evening routines, and you feel the calm afterglow of having watched ideology being born in slow, careful wedge marks. But you also feel something else, something important for the replacement question. Even if a text like Enuma Elish elevates Marduk, the city cannot afford to simply toss older gods into the trash like yesterday's broken pot. These gods are woven into family traditions, neighborhood shrines, specialist rituals, and the emotional muscle memory of generations. So what happens instead is much smoother. Older gods are kept, but their roles are reframed. Their names still matter, but their place in the cosmic seating chart shifts. It is not demolition, it is relabeling. You walk past a small shrine tucked into an alcove, the kind you could miss if you blink. Little oil lamp flickers. Someone has left a pinch of grain. It is quiet. Local devotion, not an imperial statement. And that is your cue. The way Marduk replaces older gods is often by letting people keep the faces they know while changing the titles on the doors. This section's mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian religion frequently preserves older deities by syncretism and re-ranking rather than outright elimination, with gods taking on new epithets, merging attributes, or being positioned within a hierarchy under a dominant deity. This is how a complex pantheon stays coherent across centuries of political change. It is also why the change can feel calm. You keep walking, and you begin to notice how people talk about gods in a way that is both flexible and respectful. They might say, "The goddess blessed us," and then later say, "Marduk wills it," without feeling any contradiction. In your modern head, you want these statements to be mutually exclusive, like two apps fighting for the same screen time. In their world, it is more like a layered system. A local god can still handle local issues, but Marduk is increasingly treated as the overarching authority who legitimizes the whole arrangement. First joke, you imagine the pantheon as a household with multiple grandparents, each insisting they are the real head of the family, while everyone just nods and serves them soup. The family survives by agreeing politely in all directions. You pass a group of women sitting together, spinning wool. Their hands move in steady patterns that could hypnotize you if you let them. They talk about childbirth, illness, and weather, and the gods appear in their talk like familiar neighbors. One mentions a goddess associated with love and war, and another mentions a god associated with healing. No one seems worried that a new chief god might be rising somewhere. That is the point. For ordinary people, continuity matters more than cosmic headlines. Their prayers are practical. So how do priests and rulers manage a shift in divine hierarchy without sparking social resistance? They do it by translation rather than replacement. They say, "Yes, your goddess still protects you, and also her power is supported by Marduk's kingship." They say, "Yes, the old gods still exist, and here is how they fit into the new order." The older gods become officials in Marduk's court. They become honored, but subordinate. This allows local devotion to continue while still aligning the larger ideological framework with Babylon's dominance. Historians still argue whether syncretism and re-ranking should be seen as deliberate strategies by elites to manage social cohesion, or as organic cultural processes where people naturally blend divine identities as they encounter new traditions. Some scholars emphasize top-down theological coordination, especially in major temples with powerful priesthoods. Others emphasize that ordinary worshippers are creative too, mixing and matching divine roles based on experience. not doctrine. Either way, the result is a pantheon that can bend without breaking. You stop near a small temple that is not the city's biggest. It is dedicated to a deity with a long local history. The building is modest, but cared for. A priest emerges, carrying a bowl. He pauses, says a few words, pours a libation. The gesture feels ancient. And then you notice something subtle. When he speaks a blessing, he references not only his own deity, but also a broader divine order, implying that all blessings flow through a higher structure. That is the quiet shift. You keep the old ritual, but you embed it in the new hierarchy. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, delivered in the tone of a sleepy rumor. You overhear someone say that the gods wear each other's masks. Not literally, but symbolically. They claim that when one god rises, he can appear in dreams as another god. To ease people into the transition, a woman insists she dreamed of her childhood goddess, but in the dream the goddess spoke with Marduk's voice, calm and commanding. Is that the kind of story that can be verified? No, but it reveals how people experience change through imagination. Dreams are a private theater where the pantheon can rehearse new arrangements without public conflict. Second joke. You imagine a god backstage, swapping costumes and saying, "Okay, I'm doing the fertility bit tonight. You do the storm bit, and nobody tell the audience." Again, silly, but it captures the fluidity. You walk along the canal, and the water reflects the moon. You think about how the older gods' temples might continue operating even as Marduk's temple gains more prestige. The older gods might still receive offerings, but perhaps fewer public resources. Their festivals might still happen, but with less state sponsorship. Their myths might still be told, but less often copied in official contexts. And this is how replacement becomes real without being loud. Attention shifts. Funding shifts. Copying shifts. The old gods do not disappear overnight. They fade in rank. You consider how titles work as a bridge. If Marduk gains epithets that overlap with other gods' domains, then he becomes the god you can credit for almost anything. But the older gods can remain as specialized manifestations. It is like a major corporation buying smaller companies and then keeping their brand names for niche markets because people trust them. The parent company is Marduk. The trusted local brands are the older gods. Everyone keeps shopping, and the economy keeps running. Third joke. You picture a temple administrator saying, "We're not deleting your god. We're just integrating your god into our larger divine ecosystem." Corporate language. But with incense, you stop at a household altar. A family is eating, and before they do, they set aside a small portion. They speak a name you recognize as an older deity. The gesture is intimate, not political, and you realize that for many people, older gods are family. They are inherited relationships, so the system cannot afford to yank those relationships away. It has to reinterpret them. This reinterpretation is what makes Marduk's rise feel less like conquest and more like organization. Marduk becomes the king of the gods. But kings do not usually abolish every local custom. They absorb them. They standardize them. They allow them to exist under a larger banner. That is what an empire does, and that is what a chief deity does in an imperial myth. The pantheon becomes a mirror of the political structure. As you walk back toward the larger temple complex, you feel the logic settling into place. The older gods are not being proven wrong. They are being repositioned. Their stories are not being burned. They are being recopied with new framing. Their worship is not being outlawed. It is being woven into a hierarchy that places Marduk at the top. And in that calm weaving, you can almost hear the sound of belief adjusting, like a loom tightening its threads. The city remains itself. People still pray the way they always have. But the cosmic map, the official one, is being redrawn in a way that makes Babylon's patron look like the natural center. You pause under a moonlit archway and let the night air cool your skin. The canal whispers. Somewhere, a dog barks once and then decides it is too sleepy to continue. You smile, because even dogs understand the value of conserving effort. And you understand, more clearly now, how replacement happens without violence in the heart of everyday worship. You keep the old gods, but you change what their continued existence means. You make them part of Marduk's court. You wake up with the feeling that the city has been whispering to you all night. Not with words, exactly, but with the soft scrape of sandals on brick, the occasional donkey complaint, the steady inhale and exhale of the canal. Even in sleep, you can sense the machinery of life turning. And now, after watching myths get copied and older gods get gently relabeled, you go looking for the people who make gentle possible, the scribal class. Not because scribes are secretly evil puppet masters twirling styluses like mustaches, but because they sit at a crucial junction. They are the ones who decide what gets copied, what gets archived, what gets recited, and what gets forgotten by sheer neglect. In a world where texts must be copied by hand, canon is not an abstract concept. Canon is a workload. You walk toward a tablet workshop in the cool of morning. The air smells like damp clay and ash from last night's hearths. You hear the familiar tap-tap of styluses. A young apprentice is practicing simple signs, and his teacher watches with the patient fatigue of someone who has corrected the same mistake for 10 years. The teacher does not raise his voice. He just points, again and again, until the wedge marks line up. This section's mainstream historical fact is that scribal schools and archives in Mesopotamia preserve and transmit literature, legal texts, hymns, and ritual compositions, and the choices of what gets copied and circulated influence which deities and ideologies remain prominent over time. If you want to understand why Marduk stays at the top once he gets there, you look at the hands that keep writing his name. You sit on a low bench, trying to be invisible, which is hard because your modern posture screams, "I have opinions about chairs." The apprentices are copying a list of divine names, and you notice that the list has an order, not random, not alphabetic, hierarchical. The most important names come first. This is the kind of detail that shapes minds quietly. If you learn to write the pantheon in a certain order, you learn to think the pantheon in that order. First joke. You imagine the apprentices being quizzed like, "Name the top 5 gods," and someone panicking like it's an exam. And honestly, it kind of is. You watch a senior scribe open a storage jar full of tablets, each one wrapped or stacked carefully. The tablets are not all grand epics. Many are receipts, ration lists, letters, but mixed among them are hymns, prayers, omens, and myths. The archive is a memory machine, and memory machines do not just preserve. They select. A scribe who copies a hymn to Marduk is not only preserving devotion, he is also reinforcing Marduk's prominence for the next generation of priests and administrators. A scribe who copies Enuma Elish again is not only recording literature, he is maintaining the ideological backbone that says Marduk is king. The more a text is copied, the more it spreads. The more it spreads, the more it becomes what everyone knows. And what everyone knows becomes tradition. Historians still argue whether the scribal class acts primarily as conservative preservers of tradition or as active innovators who reshape tradition in response to changing political realities. Some scholars emphasize how scribes copy very old compositions, maintaining continuity across centuries. Others point out that texts are adapted, re-edited, and recontextualized. especially when a city like Babylon needs its god to be framed as supreme. The truth again is likely a blend. Scribes love tradition, but tradition is always being reassembled. You lean in as the teacher explains why a certain god's name must be written with particular signs. The teacher's tone is reverent. Writing is not just literacy, it is authority. If a god's name is written incorrectly, it is not only embarrassing, it can be spiritually risky, socially risky, legally risky. The gods are invoked in contracts, oaths, treaties. A wrong name could mean a wrong oath, which could mean a curse, which could mean the kind of stress that makes your hair fall out in clumps. This is how religion is woven into administration. The scribes are caretakers of both. Now you watch the apprentices copy a standardized list of gods, and you notice how Marduk's titles sit like a crown on the page, even if older gods remain listed. Their names appear in relation to him, beneath him, around him. The page becomes an org chart, and you remember how you joked about that earlier. Here it is, in clay, with no humor at all. It is deadly serious. Second joke, you imagine a scribe sighing. Great, they promoted Marduk again. Now I have to reorder every list, and you can feel the administrative pain in your bones. You walk into a side room where a few scribes are debating a line from a hymn. The argument is quiet but intense. One says the phrasing should emphasize Marduk's authority over the other gods. Another says the phrasing should be more balanced to respect older traditions. And there you see it. Canon control is not a monolith. It is negotiation. It is compromise. It is people deciding how much change they can introduce without breaking the feeling of continuity. This is where replacement becomes a cultural craft. If you want to elevate Marduk, you do not have to erase older gods. You can reinterpret them. You can describe them as aspects of his power or as his appointed officials. You can place them in a story where they willingly acknowledge his supremacy. And once that story is copied enough times, it becomes the safe version, the official version. Now for the quirky or fringe tidbit. Because scribal rooms always have one person who believes the universe has hidden shortcuts. You overhear an apprentice whisper about secret tablet libraries where forbidden texts are kept. Texts that say the older gods never truly yielded, and that the whole cosmic kingship is an illusion. He says it like he is sharing a thrilling secret. But his friend rolls his eyes and says, "Sure, and my uncle is a fish god." Still, the whisper matters. It shows that even in a system that looks stable, people imagine alternative narratives. They imagine suppressed traditions. They imagine hidden resistance, whether or not such libraries exist. The idea of them reveals how power and text are linked in people's minds. Third joke, you picture someone sneaking into an archive like it's a heist movie, whispering, "We're going in for the forbidden hymn," and then getting caught by a librarian priest who just sighs, exhausted, and says, "Put it back." The most ancient kind of security? Disappointment. You spend the afternoon watching tablets be dried, stored, and labeled. Labels matter. Cataloging matters. If a tablet is stored in a prominent collection, it gets accessed. If it is shoved into a corner, it becomes invisible. Visibility is survival. The same logic applies to gods. A deity that appears in widely copied texts stays visible. A deity that appears only in local songs or oral traditions might endure privately but lose public rank. You also realize that scribes are trained in certain centers. Their education shapes them. If Babylon becomes a major cultural and political center, Babylonian scribal traditions become influential. That means Babylon's version of the divine hierarchy spreads not only through conquest, but through schooling. People trained in Babylon carry Babylon's theological assumptions to other places, like a scent on their clothes. They become provincial administrators, temple officials, court scribes, and they bring Marduk's prominence with them as a default setting. You leave the workshop at sunset. The air is cooler. The canal reflects the sky like a strip of polished stone. You feel oddly grateful for the scribes, even if their power is subtle. They are not warriors. They are not kings. But they are the ones who keep the story straight, or at least keep the story consistent enough that a city can function. And you carry this calm realization. Replacement is not only about who wins battles or who sponsors festivals. It is also about who controls copying, who controls lists, who controls the version of the world that gets taught to the next generation. Marduk replaces older gods, not by deleting them, but by being written into the center of every important document until the center feels like the only place he could ever have been. You leave the scribal rooms with your fingers almost itching to press wedges into clay, like your body wants to join the quiet conspiracy of record-keeping. Outside, the city feels louder, even though it is the same volume as always. It is just that now you can hear the hidden soundtrack, treaties being imagined, tribute being weighed, reputations being negotiated. The canal runs along, pretending it is not political, but you know better. Water always has opinions. You walk toward a gate again, not to escape, but because you want to feel how power travels. Inside the walls, gods are fed and praised. Outside the walls, gods are tested. You pass soldiers doing a slow drill, spears catching the sun. Their movements are practiced, not dramatic. The city does not want war. War is expensive, but the city prepares anyway, because neighbors exist. And that is where you feel the next lever that lifts one god over another, war and diplomacy. Victories and alliances turn into divine prestige, the way muddy feet turn into dusty feet after a long road. It is inevitable. People need reasons. They need stories. They need to believe that success is not random, because randomness is terrifying. This section's mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian rulers routinely credit military victories, city defenses, and diplomatic successes to divine favor in inscriptions and public ritual. And they often elevate a patron deity status as part of legitimizing conquest and rule. When a king wins, his god wins. When a god is said to win, the king's authority becomes harder to question. You walk along the outer road and see a small caravan returning. Donkeys loaded, guards tense but relieved. The leader carries a sealed message, and the seal matters almost as much as the words: a treaty, a tribute agreement, a marriage alliance. These are not just political deals. They are sacred contracts, typically sworn by gods. And whichever gods are named in those oaths gain a kind of legal prominence. If Marduk's name appears in more treaties as Babylon rises, Marduk becomes not only a religious figure, but an international guarantor. His name becomes the cosmic signature at the bottom of the page. First joke, you imagine being a minor local deity and realizing you're no longer included in the big treaty oaths, like being left out of a group chat. Oh, okay. Guess I'm just the god of small talk now. It is funny, but it stings if you let it. You enter a courtyard where officials are receiving goods, and you see how conquest turns into logistics. There are baskets of grain, bundles of wool, perhaps metal, perhaps crafted items. Scribes count, guards watch. The atmosphere is businesslike. The conquest has already happened somewhere else, but here is its aftermath. Resources flowing toward a center. Now you start to understand why older gods can be replaced without being disproven. The new top god becomes the symbol of the center, Tribute flows to the center. Therefore, offerings and prestige flow to the center's deity, not because people hate their local gods, but because power has a gravitational pull. If your city is now under Babylon's influence, your officials will start referencing Babylon's god more often. They will do it to signal loyalty, to keep trade smooth, to avoid trouble. And over time, signaling becomes belief. Or at least it becomes habit. And habit is belief's best friend. You walk past a wall where someone has carved an inscription celebrating a victory. It is not subtle. It names the king, names the enemy, names the god. It credits the god with strength, guidance, terrifying splendor. It may even describe the enemy's defeat as proof that their gods were weaker or displeased. You feel the propaganda, but you also feel the sincere worldview. To them, gods and war are entangled. A victory without divine backing would feel like a dangerous anomaly. Historians still argue whether royal victory inscriptions should be read primarily as literal expressions of belief, or as strategic rhetoric designed to intimidate enemies and unify subjects. Some scholars emphasize that kings and priests likely did believe the gods were active in battle. Others emphasize that regardless of belief, the language functions as state messaging. It tells everyone who is in charge and why resistance is futile. You can hold both ideas at once. Human minds are built for that. You keep walking until you reach a place where a small delegation has gathered. They are dressed carefully, carrying gifts. You can tell they are here to negotiate. Diplomacy in this world is gift exchange, oath-taking, and performance, and gods are everywhere in it. Gifts may be dedicated to a deity. Oaths are sworn by deities. The entire negotiation is framed as being under divine witness. Here, the calm explanation deepens. If Babylon becomes strong enough that other cities must negotiate with it, then other cities must engage with Marduk. They might not abandon their own gods, but they will acknowledge Marduk's authority in official contexts. This acknowledgement is a form of theological tribute. It says, yes, your god matters to the political order now. And once a god is embedded in diplomacy, he gains a kind of supra-local status. He becomes the god who matters for peace, trade, and survival. Second joke. You imagine a diplomat trying to flatter both pantheons at once. Like, may your god be supreme, respectfully. And also, may our god be supreme, equally respectfully. And everyone nodding like that makes perfect sense. The art of saying everything without committing to anything is clearly ancient. You pause near a military shrine, not a grand temple, just a place where soldiers leave small offerings before a campaign. A bit of bread, a figurine, a whispered request. The soldiers do not look like fanatics. They look like people who would prefer not to die. Their prayers are short, practical. They ask for protection, for courage, for safe return. And when a king wants to bind the army to the state, he binds the army to the state's god. That is why a rising imperial city needs its patron deity to be seen as a warrior, a protector, a strategist. Marduk's portfolio expands again, not by abstract theology, but by the needs of men walking into danger. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, the kind that flutters around barracks fires like sparks. You hear a soldier claim that he once saw a battle omen that was too perfect to be coincidence. A hawk circling 3 times, then landing on a spear just before a charge. He insists it meant the chief god was literally choosing sides. Another soldier insists he saw a shadow in the dust shaped like a horned crown. Someone else says those are just dust devils and fear. And then everyone gets quiet because even skeptics do not like being loud about skepticism before a fight. Whether the omen was real or not, the effect is real. Omen stories spread, and they attach victories to specific divine patrons, boosting their prestige like a rumor that grows with each retelling. You walk back toward the city center and notice how quickly war stories become civic identity. A victory is not only a victory, it becomes a festival, a procession, a new inscription, a new hymn. It becomes extra offerings to the God who made it happen. And if Babylon wins more often, or controls the narrative of winning more effectively, then Marduk becomes the god of success itself. You think about how older gods might react in this narrative. In conquered cities, local priests might reframe their gods as supporters of the new order to protect their temples and retain relevance. They might say, "Our god acknowledges Marduk's kingship," which allows them to keep operating. It is a survival strategy. It is also theology adapting under pressure. The older gods become dignified allies rather than defeated rivals. That is how you avoid making people feel spiritually homeless. Third joke. You picture a local temple committee saying, "We are absolutely still independent," while quietly hanging a new plaque that reads, "Proudly affiliated with Marduk's divine network." Nobody laughs out loud, but everyone understands. As the day slides toward evening, you find yourself near the river again. Boats move slowly. Goods move quietly. The city hums, and you realize that empires are not only built by swords, they are built by documents, oaths, and the repeated public claim that the chief god supports the center. War provides the shock. Diplomacy provides the glue. Together, they spread a deity's prestige beyond local walls. You stand on a riverbank and watch the current pull at reeds. You feel, in a calm way, how inevitability is manufactured. Win battles, credit the god, make treaties, swear by the god, receive tribute, offer it to the god, copy the story, recite it at festivals. Soon, the god is everywhere, power is. And if power is everywhere, the god feels like the natural top of the pantheon. You head back toward the inner streets, and the lanterns begin to glow. The older gods are still present in doorways and whispers, but the big public world, the world of kings and armies and seals, is tilting toward one name. Marduk is becoming the god of the center because Babylon is becoming the center. And once that alignment is in place, replacement stops being a dramatic event and starts being the calm reality of how people survive under a new political sky. You wake up the next morning with that riverbank image still behind your eyes. Reeds bending in the current like they are practicing obedience. It is strange how quickly our mind starts to treat the new arrangement as normal. Yesterday you were thinking about city gods as local patrons with local jurisdictions. Today you are thinking about a chief god whose name shows up in treaties, festivals, and victory songs like a stamp you cannot scrape off. And now you find yourself doing the very human thing that always happens after a big shift in perspective. You start asking whether it had to happen. You wander through the city with that question tucked under your tongue. The streets are busy, but not frantic. A potter is already working. A boy is chasing a chicken and failing, because chickens are basically tiny chaos spirits with feathers. You pass the temple district and watch the daily offerings begin again. Steady as breathing. Everything looks ordinary, which makes your question feel almost rude. If the world is running, why poke it? But your brain pokes anyway. This section's mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian religious hierarchies change over time alongside political and cultural shifts, with different cities and periods elevating different deities as supreme, and Babylon's rise is one major example rather than the only possible outcome. In other words, there are multiple historical moments when a top god could have been someone else, depending on who held power. You stop near a wall where someone has drawn a simple mark to count something. And you think about how many choices add up to one outcome. If one battle goes differently, a different city becomes dominant. If a drought hits the wrong year, a dynasty collapses. If a king dies early, his reforms never take root. If a trade route shifts, another city becomes the crossroads. History is not a straight canal. It is a floodplain. It spreads, branches, and sometimes cuts new channels when you least expect it. First joke, you imagine the universe as a scribe with a stylus hovering over clay, going, should I make Babylon the main character? And then accidentally smudging the tablet and pretending it was intentional. That is basically how contingency feels when you zoom out. You drift into a shaded courtyard where a few older men are talking. The way older men always talk, as if their opinions are structural supports holding up the sky. They mention past rulers, old alliances. The time a neighboring city tried to tax a canal crossing and everyone acted like it was the end of civilization. One of them says, Babylon was lucky. Another says, no, Babylon was chosen. Another says, no, Babylon was organized. And there it is. The three big explanations that keep circling any time you ask why one god replaces another. Luck, choice, organization. You let those words settle. Luck is weather, timing, disease, sudden death, unexpected victory. Choice is human agency, planning, ambition, propaganda, the deliberate crafting of myth and ritual. Organization is institutions, scribal networks, temple economies, the ability to maintain canals, store grain, train soldiers, and keep the machine from seizing up. All three can be true. The question is which one matters most. Historians still argue whether Marduk's rise to supremacy is best explained as an inevitable consequence of Babylon's geographic and economic advantages, or as a more contingent outcome shaped by particular rulers, specific historical crises, and deliberate theological innovation. Some scholars lean toward structural explanations. Babylon sits in a strategic place, and centralizing forces in the region make a central deity likely. Others lean toward contingency. Different political outcomes could have elevated different gods. And Marduk's specific mythic framing is tied to particular moments of need. You keep walking, and the city gives you examples without even trying. You pass a cluster of merchants negotiating prices with the slow intensity of people who know the gods are listening for honesty, but also know their children need shoes. The merchants talk about routes, about which cities are safe, about which rulers are stable. Stability is the hidden magnet. People gravitate toward centers that feel stable, because stability means predictable taxes, predictable trade, predictable seasons of not being invaded. And when people gravitate toward a political center, their ritual attention often follows. So one argument for inevitability is simple. As political units get bigger, they need a unifying ideology. A unifying ideology usually benefits from a chief god. Therefore, once Babylon becomes dominant, Marduk's elevation becomes the tidy solution. It is not that everyone sits down and agrees it is true. It is that everyone finds it useful. And usefulness tends to dress itself up as truth. But then you remember all the fragile points. The cities that could have dominated instead. The gods that already had prestige. The older divine kings with their deep roots. If another city had become the imperial center, another deity could have been promoted into the cosmic top seat. It is not hard to imagine. A different political map produces a different divine map. That is why inevitable can be a trick word. Second joke says you imagine inevitable as a smug little clerk in the temple office, stamping everything with a seal that says destiny, while accident is in the corner knocking over ink jars. The city runs on both, whether it admits it or not. You stop near a small shrine again, and you watch someone leave a tiny offering, not to Marduk, to an older, local deity tied to a neighborhood tradition. The person's gesture is tender, almost absent-minded, like brushing dust off a beloved object. This is your reminder that the divine world is not only top-down, it is intimate. People keep relationships with gods the way they keep relationships with family. Those relationships can endure even when the official hierarchy changes. So if you're asking why Marduk replaces older gods, you also have to ask why people accept it. And part of the answer is, they do not always accept it emotionally. They accept it publicly, institutionally, and legally, while keeping older loyalties alive in kitchens and courtyards. Now the city offers you a fringe-flavored whisper, because whenever people face big systems, they invent secret explanations to make the world feel less random. You overhear a man insist that Marduk's rise is coded in the stars, that the movement of certain planets prove Babylon was destined to rule, and that the older gods had to step aside because the heavens demanded a new order. He speaks with the dreamy certainty of someone who has connected dots that were never meant to meet. Another listener nods. Not because he's convinced, but because disagreeing sounds like inviting bad luck. Is it fringe? Yes, in the sense that it treats cosmic patterns as a fixed script rather than a set of interpreted signs. But it also points to something real. Mesopotamian cultures take divination seriously. Omens, stars, liver readings, dreams. They are all ways of making the future feel negotiable. In that mindset, a god's rise can be framed not just as politics, but as cosmic alignment. It is a soothing story. The universe is not messy. It is written. You breathe in the warm air and keep moving, because your own question is still floating. Was it inevitable? Or was it a crafted outcome? You look at the temple again and think of scribes copying Enuma Elish, priests performing a Kitu, rulers crediting victories, diplomats swearing oaths. All of it looks like deliberate construction. And yet, deliberate construction often happens inside constraints. You cannot just pick any god and make him supreme if the political center cannot support the claim. A god needs a city behind him. A city needs resources behind it. Resources need water behind them. Water needs canals behind it. It all stacks. So maybe the calmest answer is this. The shape of the change is likely. Some central deity would probably rise as central power rises. But the specific name at the top is not guaranteed. It depends on which city becomes the center and which traditions are most effectively woven into the new story. Third joke? You imagine the gods sitting around a table like, all right, who's taking the top job this millennium? And everyone looking at Marduk while quietly pushing the responsibility toward him like a hot bowl of porridge. No, you're great at chaos management. It's you. It is funny, but it captures the vibe of role consolidation. Someone ends up holding the main portfolio because the system needs one holder. You end your walk near the canal, where the water keeps doing its slow, stubborn work. You watch a worker adjust a small gate to direct flow, and the gesture feels like an accidental metaphor. A tiny adjustment changes where the water goes. Enough tiny adjustments, and a whole field changes. Enough political and ritual adjustments, and a whole pantheon changes. You let the question rest for now. Not solved, not closed, but softened. Whether inevitable or contingent, Marduk's rise is not a mystery lightning bolt. It is a pattern that becomes visible when you watch cities the way you watch water, paying attention to where power flows, where it pools, where it gets redirected, and who gets credit for keeping the current from becoming a flood. You keep walking with that softened question in your chest, like a stone that has been warmed by the sun and now sits comfortably in your palm. The city's life keeps moving, which is always the most quietly humbling thing. People do not pause their errands because historians will argue about them later. They just buy bread, fix roofs, and hope their children stay healthy. And yet, whenever a big official story becomes dominant, a shadow world of side stories appears alongside it. Not necessarily rebellion, not necessarily heresy, but the little whispers that make people feel clever, protected, or simply entertained. You can hear them in courtyards, at beer jars, in the corners of workshops when the supervisor steps out. In a world where the temple and palace are powerful, fringe talk is like a secret spice. A pinch of it makes life feel less controlled. You head toward a courtyard where people gather after work. Someone has set out a jar of beer, and the straws are already in place like little reeds waiting to sip the world. A storyteller sits with his back against a wall, the kind of man whose eyes always look like he is halfway inside a dream. He is not a priest, he is not a scribe, he is not officially important, which is exactly why people listen. This section's mainstream historical fact is that alongside official temple liturgies and state-sponsored myths, Mesopotamian societies also circulate popular tales, omen lore, and informal interpretations of the gods. And these informal traditions can reflect anxieties about power and change. In other words, religion is not only what is written on tablets, it is also what is whispered when no one is taking notes. The storyteller begins with a familiar hook. Long ago, in a time when gods walked closer to the earth, a city's fate was hidden in signs. People lean in. Someone's child dozes off against a mother's shoulder. The evening air is warm. The canal nearby makes that steady sound that feels like the earth breathing. First joke. You think, if the gods really walked closer back then, they probably still avoided helping with canal maintenance. Divine knees. You know, the story drifts toward Marduk. Because of course it does. When a god rises, people tell more stories about him. But the tone here is different from the official tone. Instead of Marduk being the perfect king of the cosmos, he is clever, sometimes sneaky, sometimes sharp-tongued. The storyteller paints him like a street-smart champion who outmaneuvers older gods not with brute strength but with strategy. You can feel the appeal in a world where ordinary people have to navigate authorities. A clever god feels relatable. Then the fringe-flavored bits start slipping in. Someone in the crowd mentions star codes, not in a scholarly, careful way, but in that excited, half-drunken way. They claim that certain constellations spell Marduk's name if you look at them from the right angle. Another person insists that the older gods did not truly step down. They simply withdrew, and that Marduk's supremacy is a kind of illusion maintained by ritual repetition. A third claims that there are hidden tablets that reveal the older gods will return when the rivers change course, and that Babylon's dominance is only temporary. Like a high tide. Are these claims reliable? Probably not. They are not the official record, and they often mix true cultural practices like divination with imaginative leaps. But they matter because they show the emotional underside of replacement. When a new divine hierarchy becomes official, people who feel displaced, anxious, or simply bored will invent alternative explanations. Fringe stories let people reclaim a sense of agency. They let them say, "I know something you don't." Historians still argue whether such informal traditions should be treated as meaningful evidence of popular resistance and anxiety, or as ordinary folklore that coexists with official religion without serious political implications. Some scholars emphasize that rumor and alternative myth can function as subtle critique, especially under centralized power. Others caution that folklore is often playful, flexible, and not necessarily oppositional. It may simply be entertainment. A way of making cosmic politics feel like the kind of drama you can discuss while sipping beer. You listen and notice how the fringe talk often circles one theme, the fear that power is too concentrated. If Marduk is too supreme, then who watches Marduk? If Babylon is too dominant, then who keeps Babylon honest? People do not always say it so directly, but you can hear it beneath their stories. They tell tales where older gods test Marduk, where Marduk must prove himself again, where cosmic order is not a settled fact but an ongoing negotiation. It is comforting. It suggests that no hierarchy is final, that even kings of gods can be challenged. Second joke. You imagine someone whispering, "Marduk has to renew his subscription every year at Aki-2," and the person next to them going, "Shh, don't say that out loud. The cosmos has customer service." It is funny, but it also captures the way people treat rituals like maintenance tasks. A woman near you tells a dream story. She says she dreamed of a goddess associated with love and war, ancient and fierce, standing on a roof under a red sky. The goddess looked down at Babylon and said nothing, but the silence felt like judgment. The woman woke up sweating. She interprets it as a sign that the older gods are not happy about being sidelined. Another person interprets it as a sign that the goddess is simply protecting her, because dreams are slippery like that. Dreams become a private space where people can process public change without risking confrontation. And then someone brings up a classic fringe-adjacent obsession, secret knowledge. They talk about names again, hidden names, the true names beneath the titles. They claim that Marduk's many names are actually stolen fragments of other gods' power. They say if you could speak the original names properly, you could restore the older order. It is not an organized movement. It is a mood, a yearning for a lever that could shift the world back or at least make it feel less fixed. You think back to the scribes and their careful work. The official story is heavy because it is written, recited, funded, and performed by institutions. The fringe story is light because it is whispered, told, dreamed, and adapted. But light things travel easily. A rumor can cross borders faster than an army. A dream story can spread faster than an inscription. So even if fringe talk does not topple a pantheon, it can shape how people feel about it. It can keep older gods emotionally alive even when their public rank declines. Third joke. You imagine the older gods like retired nobles hosting little salons where they gossip about Marduk's management style. "He's very organized," one says. "Too organized," another replies, sipping divine tea. It is silly, but it captures how people humanize cosmic power to make it discussable. The storyteller's voice lowers as the night deepens. He tells a tale where a traveler meets a stranger on a road, and the stranger gives him a warning. Do not assume the chief god's favor is permanent. Keep honoring the old ones too, because the universe likes respect. The moral is gentle, not rebellious. It is practical religion. Do not put all your offerings in one basket. Basically, diversify your divine portfolio, and you realize that this too helps Marduk's replacement feel calm. Because the fringe world is not necessarily trying to overthrow Marduk. It is trying to keep the older gods in circulation. It is trying to maintain a sense of spiritual safety by honoring multiple powers. In practice, this can actually support the system's stability. People can accept Marduk's supremacy publicly, while still feeling spiritually cushioned by older relationships privately. You stand up as the gathering disperses. The beer jar is lower. The air is cooler. Someone yawns so widely it looks like they are trying to swallow the moon. You walk back toward your lodging, and you feel the city's layers: official ritual, scribal canon, temple economy, and now the soft, murmuring layer of popular interpretation. Marduk's rise you see, is not only a ladder he climbs, it is also a landscape people decorate with their own stories. Some stories praise him, some stories question him. Some stories preserve older gods in dreams and whispers. All of them reveal the same truth. When power concentrates, the imagination responds. It creates side doors and hidden hallways through which people can keep walking even when the main road is controlled. And as you lie down, the canal's sound becomes your lullaby again. The official cosmos might have a king now, but the human mind still wanders freely, telling itself quiet stories under the stars. You wake up feeling oddly rested, like the city's murmur has been doing the thinking for you while you slept. The canal is still there, patient and indifferent, carrying water the way time carries everything. You sit up and realize that if you want to understand why Marduk's supremacy spreads beyond Babylon's walls, you have to follow something that moves more reliably than armies. Merchants. Because kings come and go, borders wobble, and even temples can be plundered, but trade keeps trying to happen. People always want wool, oil, grain, metal, timber, lapis, whatever the world can pry loose and transport. And where goods go, stories go, where contracts go, divine names go, religion becomes portable, not as conversion, but as familiarity. You step into the morning market where everything smells like dust, dates, and human effort. A man is shouting prices with the confidence of someone who has never once been wrong in his entire life, which is impressive because he's obviously wrong right now. Joke number 1, you think the gods invented lying, but merchants perfected it into an art form, very lovingly. Of course, this section's mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian trade networks connect cities and regions through caravans and river transport. And merchants, diplomats, and administrators carry religious practices, divine names, and cultural ideas along with goods. Over time, the god of a dominant commercial and administrative center can become widely recognized simply because his city's influence is everywhere contracts are written and goods are weighed. You walk past stacks of wool bales. Wool is huge here, a major export, and you can almost hear the sheep somewhere complaining about their careers. Donkeys stand patiently with loaded packs, blinking like they are thinking about quitting. Riverboats are being loaded with jars. Scribes sit nearby, recording transactions, because nothing moves without a record. And when a contract is sealed, it often includes divine witnesses. This is one of the most underrated ways a god spreads. Legal language. If Babylon's merchants are everywhere, then Marduk's name becomes everywhere. Not because a merchant stands up and says, "Let me tell you about my God," but because the merchant's seal, the merchant's oath, the merchant's standardized weights and measures, and the merchant's ties to Babylonian authority all quietly carry Marduk along. When you swear by a god in a contract, you are acknowledging his power to punish dishonesty. That acknowledgement is pragmatic devotion. It is also a form of advertising. You follow a caravan preparing to leave. The leader checks straps, counts animals, argues about route safety. You overhear talk of bandits, of river levels, of political tensions. The caravan is a moving nervous system. It carries not only goods, but news. And news often includes which king is strong right now, which city is stable, and which gods are credited for that stability. The more often people hear Babylon is strong because Marduk favors it, the more familiar the pairing becomes. Like two words that always appear together. Historians still argue whether the spread of a deity's prestige through trade should be seen as primarily a passive byproduct of economic influence or as an actively encouraged policy by states and temples. Some scholars emphasize the organic spread of cultural practices through merchant communities and shared administrative norms. Others emphasize that temples and rulers can deliberately sponsor cultic connections, dedicate offerings in foreign places, and promote standardized ritual language to reinforce influence. Both can be true. A system can ride on organic movement while also steering it. You travel with the caravan for a while, moving out into the open land where the sky is so wide it feels like it is pressing down on you gently. The road is dusty. The animals snort. People chat in bursts, then fall quiet to conserve energy. Along the way, you stop at small settlements, way stations, and river crossings, and at each one you see little religious gestures. A traveler touches a charm. Someone leaves a pinch of grain at a roadside shrine. Someone mutters a name under their breath before stepping into a boat. Here is the calm mechanism. Merchants do not need to abandon their local gods to acknowledge Marduk. They can treat him as a powerful god in the places they do business. A merchant from a smaller city might still pray to his hometown deity for family matters. But he might offer a respectful word to Marduk when signing a Babylonian contract, because he does not want cosmic trouble with the god who seems to be in charge of Babylon's legal world. This layered devotion is normal. It is practical. It is not ideological purity. It is survival with a spiritual accent. Second joke. You imagine a merchant saying, "I pray to my local god for love, but I pray to Marduk for paperwork." And honestly, that might be the most relatable religious specialization you have ever heard. At a river dock, you watch an official inspect goods. He uses standardized measures. He speaks in an administrative tone. You can feel Babylon's influence in the very shape of the procedure. The official is not chanting a hymn, but he is enforcing a system that carries Babylon's authority. And behind that authority is the patron god. The god becomes the symbol of order, fairness, and enforcement. Even if people privately grumble about taxes, they also appreciate predictable rules. Predictable rules mean fewer surprises. Fewer surprises mean fewer famines. The god associated with predictable rules becomes attractive. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, traveling like a rumor on the road. A merchant tells you that some traders believe certain cities have stronger gods the way they have stronger walls. They claim you can feel it when you enter the market. Like the air is thicker, like oaths weigh more. And they swear that Babylon's markets feel heavy with Marduk, as if his presence makes cheating harder. Is that literally true? Who knows? But psychologically, it makes sense. A powerful administrative center creates a sense of being watched, of being accountable. People interpret that as divine presence. The god becomes the name for institutional pressure. You rest at night with the caravan. A fire crackles. The stars are sharp. Someone tells a story about a deal gone wrong, and the punchline is that the cheater was caught by the god. Everyone laughs, but it is nervous laughter because the idea is serious. The gods enforce moral order, and commerce needs moral order. You cannot have long-distance trade if nobody trusts seals and oaths. So divine oversight becomes part of the infrastructure of trust. Third joke. You imagine Marduk as the cosmic head of compliance, holding a clipboard and saying, "We noticed irregularities in your grain weights," and the merchant sweating through his robe. It is funny, but it captures the vibe. A god who is associated with law and order becomes useful in commerce. You return toward the city after days on the road, and you feel the difference in your body. Dust in your hair, sun on your neck, the quiet fatigue of travel. But you also feel clarity. Marduk's rise is not only about kings and priests. It is about networks. Trade makes a city central in daily life. Centrality makes its god familiar. Familiarity makes reverence easier. Reverence makes supremacy plausible. By the time you walk back through the gates, you understand why a calm city-state explanation has to include merchants. They are the carriers of the mundane sacred, so they spread a god's name without sermons, simply by making his name part of the system that moves goods and enforces trust. And once a god's name is stamped into contracts across regions, that god is no longer just a city patron. He is a shared reference point, a divine standard, like a weight you measure everything against. As evening falls, you hear the market closing, the last bargains, the last laughter. And you feel the whole region connected by roads, boats, and oaths, all quietly tilting the divine hierarchy toward the god of the most connected city. You come back from the road with that traveler's sense of scale in your bones. You have seen how a god's name can hitch a ride on wool bales and sealed contracts, how it can slip into other cities not as a conquest banner, but as a familiar stamp. And now, as you settle again into the rhythm of canal and courtyard, you notice something even more powerful than merchants. Inheritance, not family inheritance, though that matters too, but imperial inheritance, the way one regime takes over another and still keeps the old machinery because ripping it out would break the whole city. Empires are surprisingly sentimental about bureaucracy. They conquer a place, then they say, "Great, we'll be keeping your record system." And everyone nods because hunger is not a fun surprise. So, when later rulers inherit Babylon's cultural prestige, they also inherit Marduk's position as a kind of cosmic anchor. New kings, new dynasties, new foreign influences. But the old divine center remains useful. And what is useful tends to survive. This section's mainstream historical fact is that in later Mesopotamian history, successive empires and rulers often engage with Babylon's religious institutions and the cult of Marduk, sometimes seeking legitimacy by participating in Babylonian traditions and acknowledging Marduk's status. Because Babylon holds immense symbolic and cultural authority, even when political power shifts, the ideological weight of Babylon and its chief deity can persist. You walk through the city and notice how people talk about rulers the way they talk about weather. This one is strong. This one is unstable. This one taxes too much. And threaded through those comments is a quieter question. Does the ruler respect the gods properly? Respect, in this world, is not just piety, it is political competence. If a ruler neglects the major cults, he risks cosmic and social backlash. You arrive near the temple district again, because all roads lead here if you are looking for legitimacy. You imagine a new ruler, perhaps from a different city or a different dynasty, arriving and realizing he cannot just declare himself legitimate. He has to be recognized by elites, by priests, by the story, and in Babylon. Recognition often runs through Marduk. First joke, you picture a conquering king standing in the temple courtyard like, "Hello, I am your new ruler," and the priests looking him up and down and saying, "Cool, what's your relationship with Marduk?" It is like being interviewed by the universe. You think back to Akitu and the public renewal of kingship. If the new ruler wants stability, he participates. He lets himself be folded into the ritual. He accepts the premise that he is Marduk's steward. This is not necessarily because he is personally devoted in a modern emotional sense. It is because the ritual is a political technology. It binds the ruler to Babylon's prestige and to the idea that the cosmos endorses him. Historians still argue whether foreign or later rulers who participate in Babylonian religious traditions do so primarily out of genuine religious conviction, pragmatic political calculation, or a mixture of both shaped by the expectations of their subjects and elites. Some scholars emphasize that belief systems can be sincere even in politically motivated contexts. Others emphasize that rulers often adopt local religious forms strategically to reduce resistance and stabilize administration. Again, the calm truth is that sincerity and strategy can coexist in the same person. In the same gesture, you walk past a group of artisans repairing a section of wall. The bricks are replaced carefully, one by one, because even repair here is ritual adjacent. A city's physical order reflects cosmic order. And when a new ruler maintains the city, maintains the canals, maintains the temples, he is also maintaining the ideology that the gods approve of stability. So if Marduk is the god of order, it is in a ruler's interest to keep Marduk's cult thriving. The cult becomes a stabilizing institution that supports the regime, regardless of who sits on the throne. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit, whispered in a tone that makes it feel like a secret, even if it is just gossip. You hear someone claim that when a foreign ruler takes Babylon, Marduk tests him with misfortunes. A sickness in the household, a sudden storm, a bad omen in the liver. The people say these are signs the god is judging whether the ruler is worthy. If the ruler survives and prosperity returns, it means Marduk accepted him. If disasters continue, it means the ruler is cursed. Is this a reliable causal explanation? Probably not in a modern sense, but it is a social explanation that shapes behavior. It pressures rulers to perform piety and to invest in the temple, because nobody wants to be remembered as the king Marduk rejected. Second joke. You imagine Marduk with a checklist like, did he repair the canal? Did he fund the festival? Did he stop being rude? And you can almost hear the cosmic pen tapping impatiently. You think about what it means for an empire to inherit local heaven. When a conquering power takes over multiple regions, it often cannot force everyone into one religious mold. Instead, it builds a layered system. Local gods continue, regional gods continue, but the conqueror adopts key symbols that unify the realm. Babylon and Marduk can function as such symbols because Babylon becomes a cultural benchmark, a place where legitimacy is performed and recognized. So even if political power shifts to another city, Babylon remains a kind of ideological capital. And Marduk remains the god whose favor signals legitimate kingship, at least in the Babylonian framework. This makes Marduk's supremacy sticky. It is not only Babylonian pride anymore. It is part of a larger political language that rulers find useful. You walk along the canal and watch workers open a gate to release water. The movement is slow, deliberate, practiced. It makes you think of how empires operate. They do not always invent new systems. They open and close existing gates. They redirect flows. They keep what works. And in that spirit, they keep Marduk. Third joke, you picture an empire manager saying, "We're not changing the god system because that sounds expensive." And honestly, it is. Temples are not just buildings. They are economies. They are archives. They are networks of loyalty. You do not casually replace them. You return to the temple district and imagine the priesthood's role in this inheritance. Priests are not merely spiritual functionaries. They are institutional leaders. They know rituals. They control archives. They manage resources. They can shape public perception of a ruler's legitimacy. So a smart ruler cooperates with them. He funds repairs, sponsors festivals, honors the god. In exchange, the priesthood can present him as properly aligned with cosmic order. This is the calm center of the explanation. Marduk's replacement of older gods is reinforced every time a new regime chooses continuity over disruption. Every time a ruler says, "We will honor Marduk," he is not only honoring a deity, he is reaffirming the hierarchy that places Marduk at the top. And because rulers crave legitimacy, they repeat the choice. You pause in the evening near a temple wall where the bricks are warm again. You can hear chanting from inside, low and steady. You picture generations of rulers coming and going, like waves, while the temple remains, like a rock. The god tied to that temple becomes a constant, a symbol of enduring order amid political flux. Older gods still exist, still loved, still invoked. But the official center stays centered because it is continuously reinforced by the needs of governance. As night settles, you feel the story nearing a kind of quiet completion. You have followed the rise from city-state mechanics to myth, from festival to archive, from war to trade. Now you see how the whole structure persists across centuries because new powers find it easier to adopt than to dismantle. Marduk is not only a god, he is a political technology, a cultural anchor, a shared reference point, and once something becomes that useful, it is very hard to push it back down the cosmic ladder. You move through the city on a late afternoon that feels softer than the others, like the sun is tired and has decided to be gentle about it. The streets are familiar now in your body. You know where the alley bends. You know which courtyard smells like bread. You know how the canal's voice changes when the wind shifts, and as you walk, you notice the small shrines again, the quiet ones, the ones that do not show up in royal inscriptions. They are still here. That is the final calm truth you carry into this last stretch. Replacement is a dramatic word for what is often a slow, administrative sunset. Marduk rises. Yes, he becomes the cosmic center of Babylon's ideology. Yes, but the older gods do not simply vanish into dust. They linger in titles, in local rituals, in family prayers, in the way people still speak certain names when they are scared or grateful or alone. This section's mainstream historical fact is that ancient Mesopotamian religious practice remains pluralistic and layered across long periods. Even when one deity, such as Marduk, is elevated as supreme in official theology, local cults and older divine traditions often continue alongside the dominant framework. Empires may centralize ideology, but households keep their habits. You walk past a temple that is no longer the city's pride, perhaps, but it is still maintained. A priest sweeps the threshold. The gesture is simple, but it holds centuries in it. Inside, an older god statue still receives attention, still receives food, still receives whispered requests. The god might not sit at the top of the cosmic council anymore, but he still sits in the lives of people who have loved him for generations. First joke, because you cannot resist it. You imagine the older gods like beloved retired relatives who are no longer running the family business but still get invited to every dinner. You do not kick them out. You just let someone else handle the accounts. You turn toward the grander complex where Marduk's presence feels like the city's official heartbeat. The difference between these spaces is not only wealth. It is narrative. It is the sense of what is publicly affirmed. Marduk is the god of the center because Babylon is the center. His supremacy is written into myths, performed in festivals, invoked in treaties, supported by temples that function as institutions of governance. That supremacy becomes normal, and normal is powerful. But as you pass a doorway, you hear a woman mutter a prayer to a goddess whose name is older than Babylon's glory. She does not stop to justify it. She does not feel conflicted. She is not thinking in terms of cosmic hierarchy. She is thinking in terms of relationship. That is the part of religion that does not care about empires. So, why does Marduk replace older gods? You let the answer assemble itself calmly, like bricks settling into a wall. Because Babylon rises politically, and a rising city needs a rising patron. Because temples are economic engines, and power flows to the center. Because festivals like Akitu renew legitimacy publicly, tying kingship to Marduk year after year. Because myths like Enuma Elish frame Marduk's supremacy as cosmic necessity. Because scribes copy what is prestigious, making it feel timeless. Because war and diplomacy credit success to the god of the dominant state. Because merchants carry divine names in contracts and oaths. Because later, rulers inherit Babylon's ideological machinery and keep it running. And because the older gods are not erased, but re-ranked, preserved through syncretism and nested roles, making the transition feel like continuity rather than rupture. Historians still argue whether the best single explanation is political centralization, priestly literary innovation, popular devotional shifts, or some deeper structural tendency toward a chief deity in periods of empire. But the most honest answer is that it is a braid of all of them, tightened by circumstances and loosened by everyday life. Second joke, you imagine a historian trying to explain it all on one tablet and running out of clay halfway through. So they just stamp "it's complicated" and call it a day. That would honestly be fair. You reach the canal again, and it is twilight. The water is dark and slow, reflecting a strip of sky that still holds a little color. You sit on a low wall and watch a boat glide by, quiet as a thought. A child on the boat points at something and whispers, and you cannot hear what it is, but you can feel the softness of it. Life continues, and that continuation is the biggest reason religion adapts. People need systems that let them keep living. Now comes your quirky or fringe tidbit for this final section, the kind that feels like a bedtime whisper. You hear someone say that the older gods never truly leave. They just step into the background like stars at dawn. They are still there, invisible in daylight, waiting for the right moment to shine again. It is a poetic way to cope with change. It is also, in a weird way, accurate in practice. The old names persist. They return in new forms. They echo in Marduk's titles. They survive in private rites. A god can be demoted without being forgotten. Third joke, you imagine a demoted deity saying, "Fine, I'll be mysterious now," and immediately gaining a cult following because mystery is always fashionable. Even in ancient cities, apparently. You stand and walk toward the quieter streets, where lamps flicker behind doorways and the air smells like cooked grain and smoke. You pass a small household altar again and see a tiny offering. The family's voices are low. The world feels held together by small gestures. A pinch of flour, a whispered name, a cup of water. The empire-sized theology sits over all of it like a roof. But the household-sized devotion is the hearth. And you realize the calmest city-state explanation is not a single dramatic event. It is a set of incentives and comforts. Central power promotes a central god. People accept it because it organizes the public world and promises stability. People keep older gods because relationships are stubborn and comfort is personal. The pantheon becomes a layered city itself. Grand avenues for the chief deity, narrow lanes for older patrons, and hidden courtyards where private prayers keep the old names warm. You let your steps slow. The night air cools your skin. The canal's sound becomes softer as you move away from it. You can feel the story settling, not ending with a slam, but with a gentle closing of shutters. And now, as promised, you wind down with the pace easing, the edges of language rounding off, the city's sharp details softening into something you can carry into sleep. You picture Babylon and all its neighbors like lights seen from far away, each one flickering with its own songs and fears. You picture temples as steady silhouettes, and you picture the gods like constellations, shifting in prominence as the human world shifts beneath them. You do not have to solve every argument. You do not have to pick one cause and nail it to the wall. You just have to feel the shape of it. Water needs channels. Cities need order. Empires need stories. People need comfort. So the cosmos gets organized in a way that matches those needs. And a god like Marduk rises to the top because he fits the shape of the time. Your breathing slows as you imagine walking one last time past silent shrines, past sleeping rooftops, past the canal that keeps moving in the dark. The lamps dim, the sounds thin out. The world becomes a quiet room. And in that room, the old names and the new names rest side by side, like tools hung neatly on a wall, ready for whatever tomorrow asks of them. You feel safe in the steadiness of it, in the idea that change can be slow, and that even when the heavens reorganize, the ground beneath your feet still holds. End of script. Sweet dreams.